Hello, and welcome to the virtual Scandinavia House and today's book talk, The Familiar and the Absurd, Literature from Copenhagen, featuring the authors Ida Marie Hede, Ursula Scavenius, and Steven Zultanski, and is being moderated by the editor and writer Tom Conaghan. Ida Marie's Adorable was published in 2021 by Lolli Editions and is translated from the Danish from Sherilyn Hellberg. The Dolls by Ursula was also published by Lolli in 2021 and was translated by Jennifer Russell. Both of the translators, Sherilyn and Jennifer, were past winners of the ASF Translation Prize. Steven Zultanski's Relief was published by Make Now Press in 2021 as well. I would also like to thank the teams at Lolli for their help for making this event possible. This talk is being recorded and will be made available on our website, scandinaviahouse.org, as well as our YouTube page. Feel free to ask questions in the chat box. We'll get to them towards the end of the program. A link to where one can purchase the books will also be added to the chat function. So moderating today is Tom Conaghan. He's the editor at Lolli Editions. His nonfiction has appeared in the Times Literary Supplement, the LA Review of Books, and the London Magazine. He is a London literary emerging writer of 2022. So I'll turn things over to Tom now.
Hi there, Kyle, and thanks very much. Thanks to Scandinavia House for hosting this. I'm really honored to be a part of this all. And also a big welcome to our audience. Good evening if you are in Europe, good afternoon if you are in the US, and if you're elsewhere in the world, just a hearty welcome. Thank you so much for attending. I think it's going to be a fantastic event with some brilliant authors who I've been so excited to sort of get to know, firstly through their writing and also last few minutes through their faces on Zoom now. As they read and discuss their work, I think Carl mentioned this, you'll be able to submit your questions through the chat function, and maybe with about 10 minutes to go before the end, we'll get through and maybe put some of your questions to them. Just before I introduce the writers, I'm going to say a little bit more about them. Just an apology for my poor Danish, and please be charitable as I attempt some of these things. I'm going to introduce the writers in just a kind of an arbitrary order, and I'll keep sort of swapping the order around as the evening goes on. The first writer we're going to meet is Ida Marie Hede. She's the author of 7 books and numerous plays. She holds an MA in art history from the University of Copenhagen and Goldsmiths College, and graduated from the School of Creative Writing in Copenhagen in 2008. Hede has taught at Gladiatorskolen, the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts, and is currently a creative writing lecturer at Johan Borup's Højskole, as well as an art critic for Dagbladet Information. She has received the Danish Art Council's prestigious 3-year working grant, and in 2018, Adorable, which I have here, which is a fantastic, this is the Lolli translation. Please do buy it after you've heard her read it. This book was nominated for the Danish Critics' Prize for Literature. So welcome to Ida.
Thank you.
Our second guest in this order of mine is Ursula Scavenius. She is a writer based in Copenhagen. She is a graduate of the Danish Academy of Creative Writing and holds an MA in Comparative Literature and Italian from the University of Copenhagen. She debuted in 2015 with the short story collection Feathers, which won the Bodil and Jørgen Munk Christensen Prize and was nominated for the Montana Prize for Fiction. Her second book, The Dolls, was published in January 2020 and was shortlisted for the Edward P. Prize that same year, as was Feathers in 2015. So welcome to Ursula.
Thank you.
The third person I'd like to introduce is Steven Zultanski. He's the author of several books, most recently Relief, which was published last year. Also, On the Literary Means of Representing the Powerful as Powerless in 2018, and Honestly, also 2018. His critical writing has appeared in Freeze, Art in America, Spike Art Magazine, and elsewhere. In January 2017, an art exhibition inspired by his book Agony of 2012, entitled You Can Tell I'm Alive and Well Because I Weep Continuously, was shown at the Knockdown Center in Queens, New York. He lives in Copenhagen also. So welcome, Steven. Fantastic. So after introductions, it would be magnificent if we heard a little bit of your work. Ursula, are you okay to read your piece first, please?
Yes, it's great. So, is it now?
Oh, yes, please. Yes,
Yeah,
if you'd like to tell us.
And hi, and thank you for hosting this Scandinavia House, and Kyle, and to Tom and everyone, and you who listen out there. Hi. I'm going to read from The Dolls. And first, I would shortly read a little bit in Danish and then switch to the English by Jennifer Russell. So just a little piece in Danish. It's from the story called Notplads House, Notplads Hus. Jeg tror, at jeg ankom her til huset om natten. Notplad tog imod mig. Han sad i en kurvestol og drak kaffe foran sit hus. Gavlygten lyste hans fødder op, det sneede, mens han havde sandaler på. Notplad sprang op og nærmest råbte: Endelig kommer du. Jeg har savnet dig i 40 år. Vores omfavnelse. Kan man kalde det for en omfavnelse? Hans ånde lugtede råden, han missede mod mig, det blev kvalmende lyst, mens han holdt om mig. Jeg tror, vi tog et par danseskridt. Løftede vi os. Notplad boede i det gamle hus. Jeg hældede med det samme til, at jeg var kommet hjem, og at Notplad på en eller anden måde måtte være min værge. Vi gik indenfor. Køkkenet lugtede stærkt af hamburgryg. I stuen summede fluerne under loftet. Der var kun det mest nødvendige møblement. Et bord, en computer, et gulvtæppe, en sofa, og oppe i loftet en pære uden skærm. Der var stille. Jeg så ud af vinduet. Det flød med kaffekopper på græsplænen, og op på himlen var månen kun synlig som en halv skive i tågen. Notplad's house. I think I arrived at the house at night. Notplad was here to greet me, drinking coffee in a wicker chair in front of the house. The porch light spotlighted his feet. It was snowing, but he was wearing sandals. Notplad jumped up and practically screamed, "Finally, you're here. For 40 years, I've missed you." Our embrace, could you call it an embrace? His breath smelled rancid. As he hugged me, the light became nauseatingly bright. He squinted at me. I think we took a few dance steps. Did we levitate? Notplad lived in the old house. Right away, I was inclined to believe that I had finally come home, and that Notplad was a guardian of sorts. We went inside. From the kitchen came a strong smell of boiled ham. In the living room, flies buzzed about in the ceiling. There were only the most necessary furnishings: a table, a computer, a rug, a sofa, and from the ceiling hung a bare light bulb. It was quiet. I looked out the window. The lawn was strewn with coffee cups, and the moon above was only just discernible, a grey half disk in the fog. I studied the floor. Its wooden planks were patterned with shapes resembling plants and roots, reeds, shoots, flowers, stems, tissue, all of it carved in the greatest of details. Among the floral patterns, I could also make out shapes resembling child hands and wrinkled skin. Others looked like corals, vines, eyelashes. As I studied the floor, Notplad washed my clothes. Then he draped my towels and dressed over the backs of chairs to dry it and lit a fire in the stove. The sky rumbled like usual. Something barbaric is in store, I thought. Or is it already over? It doesn't really sound as though there's a war going on, but it is possible that I sought shelter at Notplad's house to escape a war. Is that why I'm so quiet? If that's the case, am I the enemy? And is Notplad my ally? I have memories of the shadow, my stalker. Could that have been my enemy? It's best to breathe inaudibly and keep the lights off as not to be discovered. From the murky house, I can see the fields, the church, the road. Notplad moves about in my vicinity. I can detect his fishy breath. Coffee, he roars. When I say coffee, that means there's coffee. Gradually, I see I start to see him more clearly. He's oddly broad-shouldered, despite his small stature. His eyes are blue, and one eye is slightly bigger than the other. He moves his lips and speaks, but I can't hear him. It's as though the sea has lodged itself in my ears, or as though Notpla is speaking in a foreign language. I stare intently at his pink tongue and the movements of his lips, his brownish teeth. He peers out at the rosebed blooming in the dark with narrowed eyes, then falls silent. The cemetery and my former life don't really simply feel distant. It is as though they never existed. I belong here now. Everything is new again.
Fantastic. Ursula, thank you very much.
Yeah,
and
thanks.
It was magnificent to hear it in both Danish and English. If you're interested in the English version, this is the translation by Jennifer Russell that Ursula read from at the second. It's available from Lolli Editions. Fantastic, brilliant. Ursula, thank you so much. Next, I would like to ask Steven, could you read us a little bit of your work, probably purely in the English, but you can experiment with the Danish if you want.
Yeah. Hi. I'll read, I guess, one poem, and I will read it in the English because it doesn't exist in Danish. This poem's called Leaky. It's very pathetic, like extra pathetic. I feel like a squeezed tomato, dried up, left on the counter, not even worth remembering to wipe up and throw away, not even making too much of a mess. Nothing but memories now. All the nights I've lived have bled together. Thousands of hours of sleep feel like they've lasted 1 hour, 1 minute, a few seconds, less. My eyes were closed. I didn't see the clouds drift by the window. I didn't see the distant lightning brighten the room. It might as well have never flashed, like those dreams that I've now forgotten, which, while they were happening, I never wanted to end. I feel like a squeezed tomato, flattened, paper thin, thinner than a mirror image, just one unpleasant half-realization pressed against another. Nothing but memories now. Every time I turned from side to side, it was part of the same motion, a continuous stream of restless fidgeting, still incomplete and ongoing without me. I was an infinitesimal addition to this ceaseless movement, kicking the sheets off my legs when it was hot, pulling them up to my chin when it was cold. I might have heard the mattress squeak as I turned, but I didn't wake up. I feel like a squeezed tomato, glistening, soft and squishy, leaky, juice running in a thin stream to the edge of the table, dripping onto the floor. Nothing but memories now. The years I've spent in darkness have been absorbed into one long blank moment, lasting for eons. Life emerged from water. Single-cell organisms developed into brown algae. Lush green planets hardened into fossils. By the time I got out of bed, the sun was already high, and the clothes I had left on the floor were bathed in light. I feel like a squeezed tomato, shrunken, tiny, much smaller than a mite or a microbe. You could fit 100 million of me in a drop of spit. Nothing but memories now. While I slept, money was invented, debt universalized, and the land stripped of its mineral deposits. Other people also slept on their own mattresses in their own homes. Some of those mattresses were cheap, sunken in the middle, flimsy, hard on the back. The one I have now is okay, firm enough, one of those thin foam pads that's surprisingly supportive and lasts a few years. I feel like a squeezed tomato, no worries, no dread, no pain beyond what I would feel if something unforeseen happened, a terrible natural disaster, a boulder falling and crushing me, in which case resistance would be futile. I must have been 6 or 7. I was very afraid of the dark. At night, I would lie in bed, paralyzed with fear, imagining myself trapped in a coffin. When I got older, I would read books to pass the time and avoid the scary thoughts between going to bed and falling asleep. But at this point, I couldn't read yet. Actually, I refused to learn because I thought that I had to learn all the words to all the books in my parents' bookshelves by heart, and that seemed too overwhelming. So to ease my fear of the dark, my mom installed a flashlight on the wall next to my bed so I could turn it on if I was suddenly afraid. It was long and heavy with a shiny metal surface. She hung the flashlight on a nail, and I would lay in bed and turn it around the nail over and over. Twisting the flashlight was comforting for some reason, and it left a circular drawing on the wall with the nail at its center. It was a perfect circle. At this point, I picked my nose every night at bedtime when I was alone. One night, I got the idea that I could cover the perfect circle with my boogers, and in the end, I would have something that looked like the moon, with the flashlight hanging in the middle. I was quite excited by this project, but it took a lot of time just to cover a part of the circle. Unfortunately, we moved before I had a chance to finish the moon. I have a vivid memory of my mom scraping my boogers off the wall when she was cleaning the house, preparing my room for the next family moving in. Suddenly, my moon project wasn't exciting anymore. It became shameful. Thanks.
Fantastic, Steven. Thank you very, very much for reading that. It was brilliant. And lastly, Ida, welcome to you. Please may you read a little piece of your work as well?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I will. Thanks for the readings, Ursula and Steve, and yeah, thanks for hosting this event. It's wonderful, and hi to everyone out there. I'm just going to read a tiny bit in Danish first, and then a bit in English. Når en person dør, er det ikke længere almindeligt at åbne vinduet, så sjælen kan forlade værelset. Det er ikke fordi sjælen er fuldstændig afskaffet. Det vi kan lide at tænke på som sjælelignende, som fortryllet og animeret, et fremmedlignende væsen i os, en eller anden vibrerende motor, det findes allerede rundt omkring os, tror jeg, og i vores relationer. Vi kalder sjælen X, vinduet bliver åbnet, der sker ikke noget. Vi kigger på den døde krop, der flyver ikke noget ud. X er allerede i radiobølgerne og i det trådløse netværk. X behøver ikke at blive atomiseret og stige opad, for X har aldrig rigtig haft en form, har aldrig rigtig kastet anker. X var aldrig en enigmatisk klump inden i os. X var aldrig en sælsom definition af, hvem vi i bund og grund er, når alt andet skrælles af. X var aldrig et mønster, vi bliver ved med at handle ud fra, som om vi er en stor, uantastelig gentagelse af os selv. X var aldrig en patroniserende instans i vores ellers pligtopfyldende kurver. X var aldrig den hvide dames yndige krop. X er måske snarere en gåsehudskrop. X er måske fjer, der kilder en intravenøst, bevinget ja i tarmene. X er måske en samling af følelser i os. X er måske en motor. X er måske evnen til at forlade noget, evnen til at nærme sig noget andet. X er måske, at vi nogle gange henter andre ind i os, og nogle gange selv bliver hentet ind. That was the Danish part. Gonna jump to adorable in English and read a bit from the beginning of the book. Bee's belly is flat now. She really loves its doughy flatness, the punctured white softness that will never be tight again. Before the flatness, her belly is temporarily full, absolutely bulging, a piece of skin around something kicking and living, which is æg. Æg is pulled out of Bee's womb with forceps that grab her temples, small red indents on her temples. Egg comes out coated in bacteria from Bee's vagina and ass. Bacteria seep into egg and trigger an immune response. Now egg can live for 1,000 years. But it's almost like egg doesn't want to come out. Her head won't turn the last bit of the way in Bee's pelvis. A head is actually stuck, pushing on her cervix. Warm, drawn out spasms of pain, and egg will have to be taken out by C-section. If egg comes out through Bee's sliced open belly, there won't be enough bacteria. The doctor needs to stick a finger up Bee's asshole, rotate it deftly, and then smear a wet finger caked with bacteria across A's shrieking lips. It doesn't matter how A was born. Her lips quickly locate Bee's nipples and start sucking. Milk and cracked skin, gums gnawing on breast flesh. B would like to live for 1,000 years too. She holds A in her arms. A is so new. B can barely figure out how to hold her, as long as she doesn't drop her, lose hold of her head and break her neck. Now that A exists, B wants to survive the apocalypse everyone is talking about. She wants to grow old and wrinkled and withered and shrunken so she can stay in the world with A. She wants to communicate with an adult A on the phones of the future, maybe through some form of telepathy, maybe through small strands of DNA, conversing with each other as mother and daughter will in the future that might be. B no longer doubts the future or its new technologies. A's presence moves the lifespan of all things infinitely outwards. B says she wants to be stronger too, to have bacteria from a body that is not her own. Bacteria is like a life-giving elixir. Fecal bacteria from X are transplanted into Y's digestive tract, and changes are observed in Y's mood and metabolism. Her belly skin is nowhere near tight again. The lacerations on her uterine walls not even slightly healed. B bleeds into her big mom nappy, long, slimy strands. Maybe she needs to go home and rest, to lie down with her legs up and with A balanced on her belly and a croissant in her hand, A's mouth on her breast and stiff splashes of milk on her baby face. Or maybe she's too eager and can't relax. After A is born, she can't get enough life. She's taken directly from the delivery room to the gastroenterology ward. There, a probe is inserted through B's esophagus and into her stomach. Down there, the party is already in full swing. There are billions of fecal bacteria in B's stomach, more than there are humans on Earth, bacteria that have lived for millions and years, which moved into B the day she was born, and which will move on when she dies. In that sense, the word human isn't very accurate. She's not mostly human, not at all. Bacteria bounce around, frolicking with half-digested food as if inside a centrifuge. But it's not enough. She needs more. Inside the tube, there's shit from a shit donor whom B doesn't know. As the shit descends into her system, B is dangerously close to the brown mass. Only the plastic barrier of the probe separates her from the stranger's shit, sliding through her to become part of her intestinal flora. She might as well have eaten the poo herself. Yes, that's it. Thank you for listening.
Brilliant, Ida. Thank you so much. Yes, I love the idea of the shit donor. That's something new. Yeah. Magnificent. Everybody, thank you so much for reading from your books. They are out there and published, so please do buy them. And now I'd like to move to a different sort of section of the evening or afternoon, where I'd like to sort of kind of engage the authors in some discussion of their writing. And one of the descriptions of the event was that we would talk about science fiction, which seemed to me an unusual idea and sort of something that maybe I'd like to put to the writers. And for example, Steven, do you feel that science fiction is a useful description of how you write?
I don't know if it's a useful description of part of my writing, I think. Yeah, absolutely. I think that my work is definitely influenced by sci-fi, especially insofar as sci-fi is one place in kind of contemporary culture making where allegory is really alive and well. Science fiction and horror as well are both genres which lend themselves very much to allegory. And so if you know, in popular culture and in niche subcultures, you have a lot of writing that kind of takes on the politics of the day in very skewed ways in these genres. But I also like these genres because the allegories are often excessive. The genre characteristics and the constraints of the genre and the kind of imaginative worlds that the genre kind of exists in exceed the allegorical capacity, so that they don't really like just mirror back the world in a straightforward way. it becomes distorted. And so I'm very interested in science fiction, yes, but not in a straightforward way. I wouldn't write straightforward genre sci-fi necessarily, but I use tropes from it, and I try to use allegorical effects that I find in science fiction in my own work.
Okay, cool, fantastic. Ida, is there anything in what Steven said that you would find in your work? I was thinking also of the bit you read, that there was a sort of, I thought, a science fiction element maybe there. Is that similar?
Yeah, I suppose, like, I think in the same way, I'm also not like using the sort of techniques or genre forms directly in my own writing as you find it in sci-fi, but I'm really inspired by this sort of like maximalist or exaggerated sort of width of sci-fi, and the kind of speculative, the ability to move sort of elegantly through time, through space. And yeah, I think I work also a lot with like weird pseudoscientific ideas, as you often find in sort of contemporary sci-fi. I think it comes very close to the present, is almost sort of, you know, something that could take place now, is almost a sort of realism or hyper-realism. And in the piece I just read, this sort of transplant of fecal bacteria, for example, that sort of, you know, the transformation of the body, and the possibility that every person could be sort of optimized and have their temper and sort of power hierarchies sort of turned around through this sort of like scientific transplant, is sort of both absurd and also like could be really sort of doomsday apocalyptic, but could also be turned around to be like a kind of absurd and humorous sort of grotesque direction for the text into just sort of new sort of ways it could imagine itself, and ways that this narrator can imagine the world. So I think I try to turn it away from sort of at least from the bleakness of sci-fi that it also has, and use the sort of euphoria of the genre in my writing, and then the kind of weirdness of the pseudo-esque like science.
Okay, fantastic. And Ursula, is there anything in what Steven or Ida have said that you recognize in your writing?
Yeah, totally. I guess I also, what I hear in what you guys are saying is that you somehow also erode, could you say that in English? You erode, you corrupt, you destruct the genre from within. So totally, like I also do, I have the code, the sci-fi code, kind of the reader expectation of the sci-fi in many of my stories. So I'm kind of playing with the genre, but often it would be not fulfilled like what you would expect from that genre. And often for many of my stories, it's confronted with other genres, or with a history, very sharp and strong, recognizable images from the collective memory of the history. So and they collapse or clash together. And sometimes it's directly sci-fi elements, as from my first book I was writing about a post-apocalyptic situation with climate change. Maybe that's the most direct sci-fi, but some of my stories are also actually going on in the present, but they would feel like sci-fi. So for instance, from the story I was reading around, Laplace House is actually somehow dream-like documentary of some events that has also a personal level. And it was written before COVID, and it was about a pandemic, the feeling of everybody being contaminated, and you have to self-isolate. And so what would you call it, the genre, if you write about something that is just going on 1 month later? Because also the first story in the Dolls is about a family who's self-isolating, and it's all about this structure of fear and what it's doing to a society. But that was built on the real situation with the xenophobia we also saw rising in the refugees crisis in Denmark. So I reacted on that. So that was a very strong political matter in the present, but somehow in my trying to investigate what would happen if this continued in a very uncontrolled way, how could that end? And that's going on in the dolls. So, but the feelings, I think, about, for instance, the family just looking out on a massacre without reacting or without acting on it. That feeling is somehow still very connected to the present. But yeah, so I put it out a little in the future, and then the future 1 month later, after the publishing of the dolls, then the world changed completely. So what would be like sci-fi or surrealism in January 2020, 1 month later, 2 months later, were something real.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, I think, yeah, we'll watch out for what you write next. Would anyone else like to talk anything else about science fiction before I ask another next question? Okay, brilliant. It's just something I think actually Ida mentioned in her answer already, which was talking about the body, which was again a title for this event. And I feel like this is the kind of a shared idea in, again, all of your work. Steven, I wonder whether you could maybe talk about how the body comes into your writing?
Sure. I think that in this book in particular, in Relief, there's a lot of ambient illness and health anxiety. And so it's very much the body kind of dealing with illness over time. And not in a straightforward way that just depicts a body suffering, but in a way that where illness becomes kind of the inspiration for new fantasies or imaginings, right? So that in illness, the body doesn't become only literal, but it also becomes kind of fantastical and flexible and takes on new forms. So yeah, I mean, I think that this book is kind of full of the body and full of the body sleeping and recovering and resting and not doing anything, but at the same time kind of changing shape and being kind of malleable and being pressed into different forms. I wrote it before the pandemic. It's not a pandemic book.
Right. And I mean, is there a connection there with the science fiction and the body? It seems like there's a real crossover there. Yeah,
absolutely. Science fiction and the body, and the way science fiction can deal with, I think, as Ida said, like wide time spans too, and very kind of nonlinear senses of time. Because I'm not really just literally interested in the body as a fact. I'm interested in the body as a temporal experience, as the body in time, and especially insofar as a lot of that time is lost in sleep or forgetting or confusion and so on. And so you can easily kind of tie that to the way that the body can be represented in science fiction, or the way that science fiction can kind of deal with scales of time that certain kinds of normative fiction might not be able to deal with so well. Although I don't know if that's really true. Normative fiction does a lot with time as well. So
cool, fantastic, thank you. Ida, where would you say the body came in? Well, I mean, it's quite palpable in the bit you read, but
yeah,
how would you describe the body in your writing?
Yeah, I mean, particularly in Adorable, there's a lot of like intense materiality and a lot of sort of very porous and leaky bodies, sort of very full of liquid and also obviously full of feces and like dirt and like blood. So I mean, all the way through the book, the body is described sort of in its materiality and its grossness. And I think that was also important for me to have an extremely physical, material, almost disgusting body, but a body that was at the same time really alive and really animated. The characters in the piece I read, they don't have names, but they're named with letters, B and A. So they're kind of silhouettes, or kind of cardboard figures that can also sort of move through a world and absorb a lot of what this world contains and consists of. So the bodies kind of like are both really material, but also extremely like simple and sort of artificial. And I think that was important to me, to have bodies that sort of, as with the gut bacteria, could sort of contain the whole world, and kind of like the whole world could kind of move through them, at the same time as different temporalities also kind of move through them, as what Steve said about, you know, the kind of time span of sci-fi. Like we have the bacteria that are sort of like, you know, archaic almost, and they come into the mother's body and they're like imagined as something that has a purpose, and then they're also imagined as something leaving her and kind of making her imagine her own death and kind of decay, and kind of dissolution into the world again. So I mean, I think there was sort of an interplay between the singular body and then the kind of world that the whole book kind of describes. But I do feel like between all of our books, there's a lot of like connections with the sort of leakiness and porousness, but it's done in very particular ways. I think that's really interesting.
Yes, thank you. Ursula, I was reading your other short story, Flightland, and that was also, there was a lot of leakiness in that. Do you sort of recognize what Ida and Steven were saying in your writing?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, in the, like Ida said, it's with the archaic bacteria. Also for my characters, the body is not just taken for granted, it's something they re-experience. And I think it comes from the fact that they have limited access to normal psychological what's called condition. So for instance, in one tale, there is a person with amnesia, and one in the first book, Feather, has a trauma. So in the constant trying to understand the world around them, and also the body and the mind, it's nothing is just like it's used to be. It's a constant trying to understand. But in the first book, it's very sensual and very sexual, and there's a link between grief and escape into the senses. And but in the second book, I think I reacted on that. So I wanted to go more into the room around the body. So in the dolls, often, yes, there's a lot of the body, but it's less like flesh, like in the first book, where it's very flesh-like body, very full of lust and everything. But in the second book, it's more like there's no feelings and not so much desire. It's more like the body in the room, and the room, it's the same thing. It's more, maybe it's a little more bleak, but and it's coming from this this lack of control from the characters. They're trying to figure out their role in the family and in the house, and their observations of the surroundings become, I think that it's the surroundings and the houses which are becoming more flesh-like. So for instance, in the story, the dolls, the sisters are surrounded by a house that is very much kind of alive, and all the insects and small animals and stuff like that become more important than the body itself.
Cool, fantastic, thank you. Thanks everyone for talking about the body there. I'd like to ask a third question now, which is sort of maybe goes more into elements of process and how you are writing. I wondered, are you, in your writing, is there like an intention, a plan that you are kind of consciously following, or is there something more unconscious that maybe you're not aware of until maybe after you've written it, or maybe during your writing? Ida, do you recognize either of those two descriptions of your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think, yeah, I do. I think, I do start out planning or thinking through some maybe bigger ideas, probably way too big for me to even take them seriously as something that can be unfolded in a work. But like in Adorable, I wanted to talk about, intimate death, like the loss of my father, or the narrator in the book, and connect this sort of like experience of loss with a much bigger idea of global death, perhaps even, and how you kind of imagine death in our part of the world, and how you imagine loss and sort of atrocities, and that was like a very sort of sweeping agenda, I suppose. But sort of as soon as I started writing, it was also something that came together in a number of like directions that were sort of weaving through each other, and the book ended up consisting of 4 very different parts that also changed tone, and where one is more serious, like it's called Death Essay, and sort of has a more sort of autobiographical, essayistic tone, and others are more, and the first part that describes a family where a child is born, and there's a lot of sort of re-enchantment of daily life. That part sort of had a more frenetic, maybe sort of swirling character, and these parts sort of came together, and I think I always start out having a lot of different sort of references and ideas and things I'm reading around, and kind of use them along the way, but also sort of obviously I lose track of them at some point, and the text takes over. So it's a very, it's always sort of very interesting where you end up going with it, I think. Yeah.
Cool. And when you find that you've gone off plan, do you like the sort of what you've created, or do you rub it out in the editing?
No, I actually kind of like it a lot of the time. Yeah, I mean, of course, the book is edited a lot, and that took a lot of parts out. But I mean, I also feel like the book was trying to make these connections between things that are normally quite separate, like life and death, and sort of psychology and kind of bare materiality. And I think, sometimes there were some clashes that seemed on the page sort of awkward almost, or like absurd. And I was thinking, this isn't like a smooth text, but I think it fits so well with what the book was also trying to do, that, I mean, a lot of those things ended up being in the book and kind of like were its sort of pulse, I think, and the drive in it. So these sort of like almost collagist forms. So it made sense in the end to leave a lot of that open.
Okay, fantastic, brilliant. And Ursula, is that a similar process to yours?
Some of it, yes, and some of it, no. Ida, you said that you have to leave something open. For me, that's very important. So I have a career also before from the academics. So I found out of the many years of writing that to go into what I consider the tone that I can work with, I can be in, and I want to express myself in, I have to limit myself and somehow kill my inner academics, because if I have too much of a plan that I used to have, it's somehow not being so alive for me. I need to only have this. At least that's how I write now, and I wrote my books. I need to have this. It starts with one image, only one image that is very fixed. And often it would stay with me for many days, the same kind of image, visual path, a road for that. And then I go into that, and it's kind of exorcism. So I can get that picture out, and then I go deeper into that picture, and like in a painting or something. So I find out while I do it what's going to happen. But it's not that I don't know. I have also a plan of the story, but I try not to think of it when I write, because then it's not interesting enough for me. If I know too much, it's boring for me to write. So I need to stay very, very much in this moment of the characters. So there's also a little theater to it, I think. It's kind of theater where surprise myself somehow. I try to there should be something to investigate that I don't know from the beginning. But sure, like Ida says, that there's also kind of plan, but combined with surprise and combined with openness and combined with this investigation, and yeah. So
okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. Steven, is there anything there that Ursula or Ida have said that you also feel about your writing? I quite like the idea of surprising yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Surprising myself, keeping things open. I think those are definitely really necessary to my process as well. I mean, I often, I don't really know where I start when I start work, because I usually am kind of working on a number of different bits and pieces at the same time. And then, you know, sometimes those things are very modular and then they kind of come together in one way or another. But I often kind of, a piece comes into shape when I have maybe an idea for a form. And that idea can often be really stupid or corny. Like in the case of the one that I just read, it's this really, you know, simple form where there's just two different pieces. You get one after the other, one after the other, one after the other. So it kind of creates this little loop. And then at the end, the loop breaks and there's a long monologue, right? And so that was kind of the idea for the form that I had. And then I had an idea for the tone. I wanted it to be really kind of like a tone, exaggeratedly, like a pathetic tone. I think I was listening to a lot of kind of cry in your beer American country music at that moment, and I was really enjoying how the kind of version of masculinity that's in those songs is like incredibly pathetic and sentimental, like over the top, like so pathetic that it would be embarrassing to write something like that if it was in a different genre. So I wanted to bring that in, and so, you know, I have this ridiculous kind of image of the squeezed tomato, which is a nice little image, but it also is like it's a little bit too much as an expression of emotion or something like that. It's too sentimental and right. Overdone. So anyway, yeah, starting with a number of kind of ideas for where I want to go, and maybe a tone and maybe an image and especially a form, but then within that, yeah, just moving things around and adding and subtracting and absolutely trying to surprise myself and trying to find something that I hadn't expected, which of course is a very difficult thing to talk about because you can't put your finger on it, which is, I guess, the whole point.
Yes, fantastic.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you very much. It's quite amazing that it's 10:02 already. So we've done very well. Kyle, I wondered whether you wanted to come in here now and with any questions we had from the audience. I have plenty more questions of my own, but I wonder whether...
Right now, there's no questions from the audience. So if you have any audience, please enter them in the chat function.
Okay. Well, shall I do a question in the meantime?
Yes, please.
Just to show what questions and answers work like, just so everyone knows how it works. I wondered whether, I guess, sort of going back to this idea of process and what it is you're doing when you're writing, to what degree would you say in your writing are you confronting or looking starkly at things? Ida, is that something that you would say you do?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think maybe it was Ursula, you who formulated this at some point, that it was sort of like, maybe you called it like a sort of variation of protest literature, like confronting things. And I think, I'm sure we all do that in different ways. I think I find that obviously there's a sense of like agency and aggression in writing that, you know, doesn't normally, maybe is not accessible outside of writing, that I think is kind of true to it or interesting, that is sort of channeled into the process of writing, and also makes a mark in the writing, as sort of, my texts often work with like kind of descriptions and sort of like very like longer sententious parts and like humorous parts, and then also sort of polemical pieces. There's a lot of genres that kind of clash, and I think there's a sense in which I like to have that kind of sort of maybe a voice that is always a little too much, saying too much or being too direct in some parts of the text, and then it can kind of like almost get ashamed of itself and sort of start talking about something else. So it sort of jumps between wanting to confront things, but also wanting to find other strategies for kind of protesting that can be disappearing into a sort of very imaginary world, or very sort of absurdly humorous, grotesque world. So yeah, what do you think, Ursula? How would you talk about this?
I think that I protest against the way we are expected to protest. How we are expected to be political and like programmatic or polemic. So in a way, you can see that I'm not protesting. I'm not a political writer at all. But at the same time, I kind of investigate the language for the evil, how evil arises. So and instead of being like, I would write an article instead if I wanted to say something fixed. Instead, I'm trying to going into the paradoxes behind political matters. So in that way, I think I try to be political in a different way. Maybe also, like you said, but you are more like maybe more hybrid. But maybe I'm more. I'm taking a voice from a different part, a different political view. So, for instance, in those, it's a person who's growing up in a very right-wing family, and I would be more like the opposite. So I'm trying to go into the opposite of myself, and yeah. So it's
also in your books, it's often the characters aren't really sure who they are, or they're kind of like are discovering their own bodies, or even they don't have a sense of their own form. In the novel you read from tonight, the person is in doubt whether she's a grown-up or a child all of a sudden, and the kind of perspective suddenly shifts. And I was thinking about that, like, and kind of deliberate inability to kind of sort of be polemical in the situation, in the character's position.
Yes, but it's also to give a space, a poetic space for the excluded kind of identities in society, the traumatized or the isolated, and the former book also the poor people. So there's also a protest there against certain narratives, how that everything should be a whole, like you actually said, like everything should be a whole that we are expected to write. So everything has this kind of well-known structure. So in going into the absurd in the everyday life and seeing the monstrous there that is already here, that's kind of a manifest, I think, for
and turning some tropes upside down, right? I think, Steve, you called it like,
like you said,
ambient anxiety or something. I just sort of think that's really right for your writing, the ambience of it. And
I remember also in Steve, your character in Relief suddenly does he feel some kind of pleasure in the anxiety, or is he feeling a collective being together with people in his anxiety or something like that? That was very interesting.
Absolutely, yeah. The character kind of comes to think of anxiety as a kind of masturbation, and then kind of collective. Which, I mean, I think that it becomes very apparent in the last 2 years of the pandemic too, how how we can take pleasure in anxiety, even though obviously it's very real and painful as well. I mean, just look at how every single conversation we have is about the pandemic and about how anxious we are, and the kind of gamemanship of one-upping each other in those conversations, and so on. There's a relationship between anxiety and kind of collective feeling and sensuality, which I think is interesting.
I also remember the Russian writer Platonov. He says something like, the world situation is in my organs.
Yeah,
so inside the body, and it's actually, yeah, so it's the same maybe with the characters and the stories. The global is in the body, and yeah, so writing about it is also getting something out, a relief maybe, or a catharsis, like getting food out of the system. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's also about writing. Yeah, like in Europe, working very material.
Getting the global out. Yeah.
It goes through the body.
Exactly. Yeah, but yeah, it's so right that there's a sort of very paradoxical thing in COVID that, you know, it kind of emphasizes inequality globally, but it also at the same time kind of makes us sort of like in a masturbatory way want to be close to other bodies all the time in different ways, and also it's its own solidarity, I think. That our books didn't respond to because they were written before, or some of our books were written before that.
Yeah, exactly.
I think
but the fear was there already, right? The fear in the society.
Yes.
But when I read your works, I felt that you had this with the absurdity too, that the absurd sometimes came out of something in everyday life with details that became monstrous because you were describing them in such a monstrous way. So it would not be surrealism, but it would be like this, the kind of absurd in the everyday life. You also have a lot of that, right? Also, but that was a point for me too.
Yeah, coming back to sci-fi.
But kind of questioning what is the real, and what is surreal.
Okay. I wonder whether we've got time for just one more quick question. Kyle, is that okay?
Yeah, let's have one more question, and then we'll end it after that.
Okay, fantastic. And it's sort of going back to, I think Ursula mentioned it in Steven's writing, the idea that within the anxiety that it may be a source of communal pleasure. I wondered whether, is there something in writing that kind of redeems or gives life to, that maybe is some way of getting back at the bleakness, or just some way of, I don't know, protest against the shit? I'm not sure. Steven, when you were talking about that, I think, you know, sort of the pleasure and the anxiety, was there something in the writing that, I mean, I don't know if a counteractive force is too specific, but what is that, would you say?
Are you asking if it had a, are you asking if it literally had a counteractive force in me, as if it had a therapeutic effect? Or?
Well, I wonder, I mean, I didn't want to say therapeutic, but is there anything in writing that has that there is a benefit to the writing of?
I don't know if I could answer that. I don't know if I could answer that even for myself, but I'm not sure. I certainly don't know the answer generally for others, because of course writing can serve so many different functions. But I do think, you know, in my case, not in a personal way, but writing is a way to kind of work through fantasies and imaginaries that are both personal and collective. And those fantasies and imaginaries come out of really fraught, paradoxical, contradictory situations, both in political life and in personal life. So there is kind of there's a process of working through, I suppose. And at least in my writing, I try to, and I think maybe the case for all of us here to some extent, I like to let a lot in while working through, right? Let a lot in from the outside. Let, you know, all of our ugly fantasies and fears and anxieties and so on that are not just coming from me, but kind of move through culture and so on.
Sure.
It's a matter of kind of working through those things by also letting them in all sorts of contradictory and inconsistent ways. If that makes sense. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm being very vague right now.
Yeah. No, it's I could give you a really stupid question to be specific about. Is there anything in the element of calling your book Relief?
Yeah, maybe I'm not really sure why I called the book Relief, so I don't have a good answer. But there's some relief in working through some of that kind of collective health anxiety and kind of giving it a shape or a place in the book. That's potentially one reading of the title. But there's also a lot of just sleeping through it in the book too, and that could be the relief too. And there's also a lot of pissing in the book, and that could be also the relief. I'm not really sure.
No, sure. No, it was a very simplistic question. Sorry.
No, it's okay. There's no,
So, Ida, do you feel, because I borrowed a quote from you also when I was thinking about this question. You wrote that, it's from an interview. You said that everything I tried to write on death and loss emanated a dissatisfaction with the bleakness and the nihilism. So I wondered if maybe I'm trying to draw conclusions where there aren't any, but again, is there sort of something, a force that writing has?
Yeah, I think as I was writing about in that interview too, the one of the sort of like directions Adorable takes, it's about a narrator who has sort of lost a parent and doesn't really find that there are any like tools for that kind of loss. It's sort of like there's sort of like a void, or there's sort of a fumbling with finding a way to be able to express this particular kind of grief, and that culture doesn't really provide the right kind of space or place for the connections of thoughts or rituals or whatever you would call it. So there's a sort of like search going through the book for that, and that means like testing out a number of also things brought in directly from culture that are almost sometimes I feel like too stupid to write about. I mean, even writing about death I felt was too banal to even, for me, what could I say about that? So in a sense, it's also in the same sense taking some things and like, trying out what you can do with them, and like kind of doing it although you feel ashamed about talking about these things that should have a certain air about them, and then like unfolding weird rituals around them, everyday like movements around them, like they put a corpse into a movie and drag it by its beard through a film, things like that, so in its own way, it's probably doing the same as the other writers here are doing, but in different ways, of course. So there's something to that.
Sure. Ursula, I don't always detect sort of any sort of great relief or redemption in your writing. It's sort of, sometimes I really feel that we're really confronting the awful. Do you feel that's unfair? Is that too simplistic? Is there also a good that will come in your writing?
Yeah, sure. It's very much about reaching people. So there's some strong attempt to say something and kind of hope that the next would be the reaction of the reader. How would the reader feel when I have given my paradoxical kind of messages about this situation? Could we communicate in the silence? So there's kind of hope there, but about the writing process as being kind of lustful, maybe in Birdland, in Feather, it's the most I was most close to that because I was writing it on a hospice when my mother was dying. So I had to write because I was writing this. It was very strange actually, because I had been confused about a big manuscript, and I put that off and started with the notes on this hospice. And it was so it was not so much about being the pleasure of writing something out, but it was more the surviving in putting down words on what was happening. So and there's something positive in the word too, I think, when you write, because you have to be able to be in the present and in this unbearable situation. Yeah, but the funny thing that is that it didn't become autobiographical. It was stories that had nothing to do with yeah. But it had certainly something to do with the kind of grief therapy, grief notes. So yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much for that answer. And Ida and Ursula and Steven, thank you all very much for your time and your brilliant answers and your ideas.
Thank you.
I think
Thank you so much.
We're probably over time, so I think, Kyle, would you like to finish us off?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Tom, for moderating. Thank you, Steven, Ida, and Ursula for participating. It was a wonderful conversation. The links to buy the books are in the chat function, so I do recommend that you do that. And I hope we'll be doing a lot more literary events in the future. I know we have some coming up at the end of this month and in February and March already. So please visit the website and Scandinavius.org. And I hope to see everyone either in the virtual world or in person at Scandinavius in New York.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.